The bullet missed Dr. Sarah Chen's head by 3 inches, shattering the rock behind her into dust. She didn't flinch. Her hands, slick with blood that wasn't her own, continued suturing the torn artery in Sergeant Mill's neck as Taliban fighters turned the Korengal Valley into hell on earth. 19 soldiers lay wounded around her, and she was their only chance. A civilian trauma surgeon who wasn't supposed to be there, wearing no body armor, carrying no weapon except her surgical kit. 40 meters away, Commander Jake Morrison watched through his scope in disbelief. Just 6 hours ago, he dismissed her with 4 words that now felt like the stupidest thing he'd ever said. She's just a doctor. He was about to learn that sometimes, in the chaos of war, a doctor who refuses to stay behind the lines is the deadliest weapon you can have, not because she takes lives, but because she absolutely refuses to let death win. The radio crackled with desperate voices. "We need immediate evac. Multiple casualties." "Negative," came the reply. "LZ is too hot. 45 minutes minimum." Sarah heard those words and made a decision that would either make her a hero or a memory. She stood up in the middle of the firefight, medical bag in hand, and started running toward the wounded. This is the story of the day a 5 feet 6 inches civilian surgeon made 20 Navy SEALs redefine the word warrior. Before we begin, be sure to subscribe to our channel so you never miss these true stories of courage. And let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. The forward operating base in eastern Afghanistan was a maze of concrete barriers and razor wire under the scorching sun. Dr. Sarah Chun adjusted her medical bag as she stepped off the Black Hawk, her civilian clothes stark against the military fatigue surrounding her. At 32, she was one of the youngest trauma surgeons ever recruited by Doctors Without Borders, but her reputation preceded her, brilliant, dedicated, and utterly uncompromising when it came to patient care. Commander Jake Morrison watched from the Tactical Operations Center as the new medical personnel arrived. His weathered face, marked by 15 years in the Navy SEALs, betrayed his skepticism. "Another civilian doctor," he muttered to his second-in-command, Lieutenant Rodriguez. "What we need are combat medics, not someone who'll freeze when the bullets start flying." Rodriguez shrugged. "Orders from up high. They say she's the best trauma surgeon they could get on short notice after Williams got medevaced." "She's just a doctor," Morrison said dismissively, turning back to his tactical maps. "Keep her in the medical tent where she belongs." Sarah's first week at FOB Chapman was a study in military bureaucracy and barely concealed condescension. The combat medics respected her medical knowledge, but doubted her ability to function under fire. She could feel their eyes on her during every trauma call, waiting for her to crack under the pressure of incoming wounded. The base was currently supporting Operation Mountain Thunder, a joint mission to clear Taliban strongholds from the surrounding valleys. Every day, helicopters brought in wounded soldiers, and Sarah worked tirelessly alongside the military medical team. She noticed Morrison watching her occasionally from across the compound, his expression unreadable behind his Oakley sunglasses. "Dr. Chun," Sergeant Peters, one of the senior medics, approached her one evening as she was reviewing patient files. "Commander Morrison wants to brief you on tomorrow's operation." Sarah looked up, surprised. "I thought medical personnel weren't included in tactical briefings." "Special circumstances," Peters said cryptically. The briefing room was cramped and hot, filled with special operators studying satellite images and intelligence reports. Morrison stood at the front, his presence commanding immediate attention. "Tomorrow at 0600, we're inserting 3 teams into the Korengal Valley," he began, his voice carrying the authority of countless missions. "Intelligence indicates a high-value target meeting. We expect heavy resistance." His gaze found Sarah in the back of the room. "Dr. Chen, you'll remain here with the quick reaction force. We're expecting casualties." Sarah raised her hand. "Commander, what's the estimated extraction time for wounded?" Morrison's jaw tightened slightly. 30 to 45 minutes, weather permitting." "That's too long for critical trauma cases," Sarah said firmly. "You need medical support closer to the operational area." The room went silent. Several operators exchanged glances. No one challenged Morrison's tactical decisions, especially not a civilian. "Negative, Doctor," Morrison replied coolly. "The operational area is too hot for civilian personnel. You'll treat casualties when we bring them to you." Sarah stood up, her 5'6" frame dwarfed by the operators around her. "With respect, Commander, the golden hour for trauma doesn't care about your operational concerns. Soldiers will die unnecessarily if—" "The decision is made," Morrison cut her off. Dismissed, Sarah left the briefing room, frustration burning in her chest. She'd seen too many preventable deaths because of delayed medical intervention. That night, she couldn't sleep, studying maps of the Korengal Valley and reviewing her emergency medical supplies. The next morning came too quickly. Sarah was in the medical tent when the radio crackled to life at 0615. "Base, this is Hammer 1. Troops in contact. Heavy casualties." Morrison's voice came through immediately. "Hammer 1, what's your status?" "Ambush. We're pinned down. At least 6 wounded, 2 critical. We need immediate medevac." Sarah grabbed her trauma bag and rushed toward the command center where Morrison was coordinating the response. On the screens, she could see helmet cam footage of the chaos. Soldiers taking cover behind rocks as bullets sparked off the ground around them. "QRF is 15 minutes out," Rodriguez reported. "Medevac?" Morrison asked. "Weather's turning. Minimum 45 minutes, maybe longer." Sarah watched the feeds, her trained eye catching glimpses of wounded soldiers. One was clutching his neck, blood seeping between his fingers. Another wasn't moving at all. "Commander," she said urgently, "that soldier has an arterial bleed. He won't last 45 minutes. Morrison didn't look at her. "We're doing everything we can." On the screen, they watched as a soldier tried to drag his wounded teammate to better cover, only to collapse as bullets struck him in the leg. The radio erupted with overlapping voices, panic creeping into their professional comm. "Hammer 2 is hit. Multiple casualties. We need help now." Sarah's decision crystallized in an instant. She turned and ran from the command center, Morrison's shout echoing behind her. She sprinted across the base to where a little bird helicopter sat idle, its pilot doing post-flight checks. "Chief Warrant Officer Thompson," she called out. The pilot looked up, surprised. "Doc, what's wrong?" "I need you to fly me to the Korengal Valley." "Now." Thompson laughed nervously. "Doc, that's a hot zone. Commander Morrison would." "Soldiers are dying," Sarah interrupted, climbing into the helicopter and strapping herself in. "Every second we waste is a life lost. I'll take full responsibility." Thompson hesitated, then something in Sarah's eyes convinced him. "God help us both," he muttered, starting the engine. The little bird lifted off just as Morrison burst onto the flight line, shouting into his radio. Sarah could see his furious expression as they banked away toward the mountains. "Doc, you realize this is insane, right?" Thompson shouted over the rotor noise. "Just get me as close as you can," Sarah replied, checking her medical supplies one more time. She had 2 tourniquets, limited blood products, surgical tools, and enough morphine for maybe 6 soldiers. It would have to be enough. The flight to the valley took 12 minutes. As they approached, Sarah could see smoke rising from multiple locations. The radio traffic was constant, reports of casualties, requests for ammunition, calls for fire support. "I can't land in the middle of that," Thompson said, gesturing to where the heaviest fighting was occurring. "Best I can do is that ridge line, about 300 meters from Hammer 1's position." "Do it," Sarah said. The little bird touched down hard on the rocky ridge. Sarah was out before the skids fully settled, her medical bag bouncing against her hip as she ran. Behind her, Thompson lifted off immediately, not wanting to present a stationary target. The sound of gunfire was deafening, echoing off the valley walls. Sarah could see muzzle flashes from Taliban positions on the opposite ridge. She ran in a crouch, her civilian clothes making her conspicuous against the tan rocks. The first wounded soldier she encountered was Private Jackson, barely 20 years old, pressing a blood-soaked bandage against his thigh. Sarah slid to her knees beside him, immediately assessing the wound. "Femoral artery is intact," she said, relief flooding through her. "You're lucky." She quickly applied a pressure bandage. "Keep pressure here. I'll be back." "Doc, what are you doing here?" Jackson asked, shock evident in his voice. "My job," Sarah replied, already moving toward the next casualty. The scene she found with Hammer 1 was worse than the video feeds had suggested. "Sergeant Mills, was lying behind a boulder, his neck wound still bleeding despite another soldier's attempts to apply pressure. Sarah immediately took over, her fingers finding the damaged carotid artery. "I need all the combat gauze you have," she ordered. The soldiers scrambled to comply, even as bullets whined overhead. Sarah worked with mechanical precision, clamping the artery and packing the wound. Mill's eyes fluttered open, focusing on her with confusion. "Stay with me, Sergeant," she said firmly. "You're going to be fine." An explosion nearby showered them with dirt and rocks. Sarah didn't flinch, her hands steady as she secured the dressing. She heard someone calling for a medic from further up the ridge. "Where?" she asked the nearest soldier, Corporal Davies. "About 50 meters that way, but Doc, you can't. It's completely exposed." Sarah grabbed her bag. "Cover me." Before anyone could protest, she was running across open ground. Taliban fighters immediately zeroed in on her movement. Bullets kicked up dust at her feet, and she heard the distinctive crack of rounds passing close to her head. She dove behind a small outcropping just as a burst of automatic fire chewed up the ground where she'd been standing. "Medic!" The call was weaker now. Sarah crawled on her belly, dragging her medical bag, until she found Staff Sergeant Washington. His left arm was mangled, bone visible through torn flesh, and he was losing blood fast. "Hey, Doc," Washington managed, his face pale and sweaty. "Fancy seeing you here." "Save your strength," Sarah said, immediately applying a tourniquet above the wound. Washington groaned but remained conscious. She started in 4 with practiced ease, even as the ground around them continued to be peppered with gunfire. "Hammer 1, this is Morrison," the radio crackled. "QRF is 5 minutes out. What's your status?" "We have wounded being treated," someone replied. "That civilian doctor is here." There was a pause. "Say again." "Dr. Chen is here, sir. She's treating casualties under fire." Sarah ignored the radio chatter, focused on stabilizing Washington. She just finished when she heard a cry from the opposite direction. Hammer 2's position, nearly 100 meters away, through a gauntlet of enemy fire. "How many wounded with Hammer 2? She asked Washington. "Last count, maybe 8 or 9, he gasped. Sarah looked at the open ground between the two positions. It was a killing field, with no cover for at least 30 meters in the middle. But soldiers were dying. "Doc, don't even think about it." Washington grabbed her arm weakly. "That's suicide." Sarah gently removed his hand. "I've got 9 more patients." She took a deep breath, then burst from cover, running in an unpredictable zigzag pattern she'd learned from watching the soldiers train. The Taliban fighters concentrated their fire on her immediately. Bullets cracked and whined around her. 10 meters from Hammer 2's position, she felt something tug at her shirt, and warm liquid spread across her ribs. She didn't stop, diving into cover as soldiers reached out to pull her to safety. "Jesus Christ, Doc. You hit." Staff Sergeant Roberts examined her side. Sarah looked down. A bullet had grazed her ribs, leaving a bloody furrow. "It's superficial," she said, already looking around at the wounded. The situation here was critical. She counted 9 casualties, 3 of them unconscious. She went into what she called her trauma zone, where everything else faded away except the medical priorities in front of her. Triage first, black tag for the one who was already gone, red tags for 3 critical cases, yellow for the rest. The first critical case was Specialist Kumar, who had taken shrapnel to his abdomen. Sarah could see loops of intestine through the wound. Without hesitation, she began debriding and packing the wound, using the limited supplies from both her bag and what the soldiers had. "I need all your saline," she called out, "and get me any clean cloth you have." As she worked, the firefight intensified. The QRF had arrived, but the Taliban had reinforced as well. The medical area became a strange bubble of focused calm within the chaos, with Sarah at its center, moving from patient to patient with economical efficiency. Lance Corporal Martinez had a tension pneumothorax, air trapped in his chest cavity, compressing his lung. Sarah didn't have a chest tube, so she improvised with an 4 catheter, performing a needle decompression that immediately improved his breathing. "Doc, we've got another one." They brought in Sergeant Thompson, the Hammer 2 team leader. He'd been shot through the chest and was coughing blood. Sarah recognized the signs of a hemothorax immediately. Without a proper surgical suite, her options were limited, but she performed emergency procedures in worse conditions in South Sudan. Using her surgical kit, she made a small incision between Thompson's ribs, inserted a makeshift drain using 4 tubing, and began evacuating the blood from his chest cavity. The procedure was crude but effective. Thompson's breathing improved almost immediately. "Morrison's calling for you," Roberts said, handing her the radio. "Dr. Chun, this is Commander Morrison. Medevac is 20 minutes out. Can you hold?" Sarah looked around at the stabilized casualties. "Affirmative, but I need immediate resupply. I'm out of almost everything. Already en route with the QRF reinforcements." "Chun." Morrison paused. "Good work." The next 15 minutes tested every skill Sarah had acquired in 10 years of trauma medicine. 2 more soldiers were brought in with injuries from a rocket-propelled grenade. One had severe burns covering 30% of his body. Sarah used the last of her morphine on him, then had to get creative with pain management using pressure points and distraction techniques she'd learned in resource-limited settings. The other soldier, Private First Class Davis, had multiple fragment wounds and was going into shock. Sarah had no blood products left, so she organized a walking blood bank, quickly blood typing the unwounded soldiers and setting up soldier-to-soldier transfusions using her remaining 4 supplies. The medevac helicopters finally arrived in a thunder of rotor blades, their door gunners laying down suppressive fire as they landed. Sarah supervised the loading of casualties, ensuring the most critical were positioned where she could continue working on them during the flight. "That's 19 wounded, Doc," Roberts shouted over the helicopter noise. "You treated 19 casualties under fire." Sarah didn't respond, focused on keeping pressure on a bleeding wound as they lifted off. It wasn't until they were halfway back to base that the adrenaline began to wear off, and she became aware of the burning pain in her side where the bullet had grazed her. The base medical facility was ready when they arrived. Military doctors and medics swarmed the helicopters, but they quickly realized Sarah had already done most of the critical interventions. Every single one of the 19 casualties she treated was still alive. "My God," Major Williams, the chief medical officer, said as he reviewed her field treatment notes. "These interventions, you performed a field thoracotomy with basic surgical tools. He would have died otherwise," Sarah said simply, wincing as a medic cleaned her own wound. Morrison appeared in the medical facility, his expression unreadable. The room fell silent as he approached Sarah. She met his gaze steadily, prepared for the confrontation. "You disobeyed a direct order," he said quietly. "You put yourself and Chief Thompson at risk. You could have been killed or captured." "Yes, sir," Sarah replied, not backing down. "And 19 soldiers are alive because of it." Morrison studied her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he extended his hand. "You're not just a doctor," he said, respect evident in his voice. "You're a warrior. A different kind, maybe, but a warrior nonetheless." Sarah shook his hand, surprised by the firm approval in his grip. "I'm a doctor who does what's necessary," she corrected. "Nothing more, nothing less." "Doc!" Jackson called out from one of the beds. "Mills wants to talk to you." Sarah excused herself and went to Mills' bedside. The sergeant's neck was properly bandaged now, and his color was already improving. "Doc," Mills whispered hoarsely, "Thompson told us what you did. Running across that open ground, that was the bravest thing I've ever seen." "Or the stupidest," Sarah replied with a slight smile. "Depends on your perspective." Over the next hours, she made rounds, checking on each of the soldiers she treated in the field. Kumar would need surgery but would survive. Martinez was breathing normally. Washington would keep his arm. Thompson's chest drain had saved his life. Each success was a small victory against the chaos of war. Later that evening, Morrison found her sitting outside the medical facility, watching the sunset paint the mountains orange and red. He sat down beside her without invitation. "I owe you an apology," he said after a moment. "I judged you before knowing what you were capable of." Sarah shook her head. "You were protecting your soldiers from what you saw as a liability. I understand that. Still," Morrison continued, "what you did today. I've seen Navy SEALs who wouldn't have run through that fire. Where did you train?" "South Sudan, Syria, Yemen," Sarah replied. "Places where the nearest hospital might be days away, where you learn to do everything with nothing, where the difference between life and death is often just the willingness to act despite the risk. Morrison nodded slowly. The Department of Defense is going to want to debrief you. What you did will probably change how we position medical assets in combat zones. Good, Sarah said firmly. It's about time. The golden hour doesn't care about operational security or tactical considerations. Soldiers deserve immediate medical care, not bureaucratic delays. You realize you'll probably get a commendation for this? Morrison said. Civilian awards for valor under fire are rare, but what you did— I don't want medals, Sarah interrupted. I want policy changes. I want combat medics positioned closer to operations. I want pre-positioned surgical supplies. I want every soldier to know that medical help will come for them, no matter what. Morrison smiled slightly. You really aren't just a doctor, are you? Before Sarah could respond, a commotion arose from the entrance to the base. A convoy of vehicles arrived, and Sarah recognized the markings of high-ranking officials. General Patricia Hayes, commander of coalition forces in Afghanistan, stepped out of the lead vehicle. Where's Dr. Chun? The general asked loudly. Morrison and Sarah stood as the general approached, followed by her entourage. General Hayes was an imposing woman in her 50s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Dr. Chun, the general said, extending her hand. I've been monitoring the radio traffic from today's operation. 19 casualties treated under fire all survived. Do you understand what you've accomplished? I did my job, General, Sarah replied. No, General Hayes said firmly. You redefined what's possible in combat medicine. I've already spoken with the Secretary of Defense. We're creating a new position, forward surgical response teams, civilian surgeons embedded with special operations units. You'll help design the program if you're willing. Sarah glanced at Morrison, who nodded encouragingly. On one condition, she said. The teams get full autonomy to position themselves based on medical, not tactical, considerations. General Hayes smiled. You drive a hard bargain, Doctor. But after today, I think you've earned that right. Agreed. As the general's entourage departed to debrief the operation, Morrison turned to Sarah. You know this means you'll be working with my team regularly now. Can you handle that, Commander? Sarah asked with a slight smile. A civilian doctor who doesn't follow orders? After today, Morrison replied. I think the question is whether we can keep up with you. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep again, but this time it wasn't from worry. She walked through the medical facility, checking on her patients one more time. Mills was awake, unable to speak, but able to squeeze her hand in gratitude. Washington was arguing with a nurse about wanting solid food. Kumar was stable after surgery. Thompson was breathing easily. She found herself on the roof of the medical facility, looking out over the base. The stars were brilliant in the clear mountain air, and somewhere in the darkness, she could hear soldiers laughing, alive to share another day's stories. Chief Thompson, the helicopter pilot, found her there. Doc, I've got something for you, he said, handing her a patch. It was the unofficial emblem of the base's medical unit, but modified, a combat medic insignia with wings added. The guys had it made, Thompson explained. You're not just a doctor to them anymore. You're the angel of Karangal Valley. Sarah held the patch, touched by the gesture. I'm still just a doctor, she said softly. No, Doc, Thompson replied. Morrison was right. You're something more. You showed us that sometimes the greatest courage isn't in picking up a weapon, but in refusing to let death win, no matter the cost. The next morning brought new casualties, new challenges. But something had fundamentally changed at FOB Chapman. The medics looked at Sarah differently now, not as an outsider, but as one of them. The soldiers knew that no matter where they were, no matter how bad things got, someone would come for them. Morrison implemented new protocols, positioning medical assets closer to operational areas. Sarah's actions had sparked a revolution in combat medicine that would save countless lives in future operations. 3 weeks later, at a ceremony attended by coalition forces, Sarah stood uncomfortable in dress clothes as General Hayes presented her with the Distinguished Service Cross, one of the highest civilian honors for valor in combat. For extraordinary heroism in connection with military operations, the general read. Dr. Sarah Chin repeatedly exposed herself to enemy fire to provide life-saving medical treatment to 19 wounded soldiers. Her actions reflect the highest traditions of military medical service and civilian courage. As Sarah accepted the medal, she looked out at the audience, the soldiers she'd saved, the medics she'd worked alongside, and Morrison, who gave her a respectful nod. She thought about all the future soldiers who would benefit from the changes her actions had inspired. In her acceptance speech, she said simply, "I'm honored, but this recognition belongs to every medic, every corpsman, every doctor who's ever run toward danger to save lives. I may be just a doctor, but in the moments that matter, that's exactly what soldiers need, someone who values their lives above all else, someone who will come for them no matter what. That's not heroism, it's medicine at its purest." The applause was thunderous, but Sarah's mind was already elsewhere, thinking about the next mission, the next casualty, the next life to save. Because she was, after all, just a doctor, one who had proven that sometimes that's the most powerful thing you can be. If this story touched you, don't forget to show your support. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe for more breathtaking stories like this.